morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this program. Yesterday, we started the discussion on, as a way of exploring one of the repeated themes on this platform. Why is Zimbabwe a failed state? And one of the common reasons we have found is that as a nation, we have failed to learn from history. And so the argument, the discussion was on those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And we, as a nation, are repeating the same mistakes, and we are doomed. And that is why we are a failed state. But I think it is important to point out at this point that there are some people out there who are incapable of learning anything from history because they fail to comprehend a mistake. And on this platform, we have at one point discussed the issue of, and gave the example of Boxer the horse in George Orwell's Animal Farm. Boxer took as long to learn the 4 letters of the alphabet as the other animals took to learn the whole alphabet. And then when they moved him on to the next 4 letters, it took just as long again to learn. And by the time he had mastered those 4, he had forgotten the first 4 letters. In other words, whether we like to admit it or not, there are some people who are incapable of learning from history because even when they're presented with the facts and they're explained to them, it is just water off a duck speck. They fail to comprehend it. It goes in one ear, out the other ear. And we've given examples of that as well here, of how some people, notably the Chamisa Pt2 brigade, have all but failed to comprehend that Chamisa lied to them when he said he had plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes, ZANU-PF will not rig the elections. You would think that is fairly a simple, straightforward statement. They understood that, and they were called to participate in the elections on the basis of that. Then after the election, Chamisa turned around and said, ZANU-PF rigged the elections. The very thing that he had told them would not happen. And yet when you say to these people, so you now accept that Chamisa lied to them, they say no. That is what we are talking about here. But in this discussion, we really want to focus on those people who should have no reason, no excuse for comprehending the facts, the reality. And yet, for some reason, they still continue to fail to learn from those historic facts and keep repeating them. Those are the people we want to focus on. And to start off today's discussion, I'd like to play a video clip of Dr. Skosana Moyo. And hear what he has to say on a number of issues, but all related to what we've been trying to talk about here. So I'll just set it up now. Just a minute. Here we go.
Listen to any government. When you ask them questions about underperformance in their country, they will find an external reason every single time. It's because somebody has done this. It's because of colonization. It's because of slavery. It goes on and on and on. The truth is that it is easier to name countries that have never been colonized than those that have been colonized, because pretty well everybody has been colonized at one point or other. But isn't it surprising that it's only African countries that have stayed fixated on what the others have done wrongly to them, and they continue to use this as a reason for not moving on and managing their environment more successfully? So we then spend lots of money. Like I say, we send people to everywhere where we can send them. And what is fascinating is that we don't seem to have the intelligence to understand that actually we've got no voice. We can send lots of people to the UN, but they don't have a reason to listen to us. What they do, because of political correctness, is to humor us. They give us a space, they give us a chair, but they don't listen to us because we're not worth listening to. Because our contribution does not come from a point of credibility. If we're credible, the only way you get credible is to run your own space properly and successfully. There are no exceptions. If you look at the evolution of especially the Eastern countries, they are where they are today, and they've got a seat at the table because they've run their own countries successfully. Begrudgingly or otherwise, the world is accommodating them. The same path is going to have to be followed by us. But you may very well ask and say, but how does this all lead to self-enslavement? The most critical element about this problem is how our children experience the world we've created. Our children grow up seeing a space that is run totally incompetently. Look at our schools, look at our hospitals, look at our infrastructure. At every turn, what they experience is things that are not run properly. And we reinforce that by taking them when we need them to go to school and we can afford it. Where do we send them? We don't send them to our own institutions because we know they are not good. When our families fall sick, where do we send them? We cannot send them to our own institutions because we know they are not any good. So, inadvertently, we are actually colonizing our own children in a manner that is much, much worse than anybody ever did. Because the perception we've created in their minds is that the world we run is not worth belonging to, because no good comes out of it. And if...
Well. Ben, welcome to the program.
Good day to you and good day to all viewers. Thank you for joining us. You know, I mean, I totally agree with him on the first part. Then I differ on some of the second, or most of the second part. Well, the first part I agree is to say, you know, as Africa, particularly Zimbabwe, we have found good excuses and ridiculous excuses for our failure. I mean, Zimbabwe, particularly the ZANU-PF government, has ran with the story of sanctions since I don't know when. Everything has been about sanctions. The economy is not working, it's sanctions. The rain is not, coming down, it's sanctions. the roads have potholes, it's sanctions. There's no medicines in the hospitals, it's sanctions. Everything is sanctioned. Before that, blame it on the whites. They are doing that, they are doing this. So when you find excuses, you then become comfortable with what is. Nothing really bothers you. You can always point it to say, it's sanctions, or it's somebody else's problem. We are doing okay. So I agree with him to say, we've gotten to a place where we blame our colonial masters or our previous colonial masters to say, if you hadn't colonized this, we would have been far greater. If this hadn't happened, then we would have been, okay. But then the question is, why are you not doing okay? Particularly for Zimbabwe, 46 years after independence, you actually got the country far much better than what it is now. If you claim to be doing such a great job, surely you would have, upped the game, or climbed a little higher in terms of progress, to show that you are very much capable of doing that. But not our leadership, not our Africa. We have become very, very used to it, to the same position that we are in, that we have become comfortable. It's the new way of life. Yesterday I referred to former Prime Minister Ian Douglas Smith, where he says that people will walk on water, on sewage ponds, and they will get accustomed to that, such that it becomes a normal way of life. Hopping through, puddles of sewage nowadays in Zimbabwe is very normal. Seeing sewage flow through the roads, it's normal. You start scanning to say, how do I jump across? And you made it across. You're very happy to say, at least no, I didn't trap it. But then eventually, a few months ago, somebody fell into a sewage pit. And when they went in there trying to retrieve a body, lo and behold, it wasn't one, it was three. It's become normal where people send pictures on social media of sewage ponds that are left, that are dug up and left unattended. Do we then blame sanctions for that? Who dug that? It is us. It has got nothing to do with our former colonial, masters. But we have to have an excuse for underperformance. And it sits well with us when we, push the buck onto somebody else, which is very, very sad. Africa is the richest continent in the world. We shouldn't be the last. We have absolutely no reason why we should be the worst run continent on planet Earth. We have everything. But because we are in this system or in this mindset that we can blame it on others, we will be all right.
I found what Dr. Moyo saying there totally refreshing. One of the problems that has held back not only Zimbabwe, but Africa in general, is that very issue. Instead of looking at a problem say, the lack of development and trying to find a solution. We have instead preferred to find a scapegoat. In this particular case, blame it on the colonizers. It is a pitfall, because once you have found a scapegoat, you're likely to settle on the scapegoat instead of finding the solution to the problem. One of the most common problems in most African countries, and in Zimbabwe in particular, is a problem of corruption. Corruption is an indigenous problem. Mismanagement, wastage of resources is a serious problem. But instead of saying, right, we need to address this problem, if you are going to say, oh, we are not doing well because we are under sanctions, the West have imposed sanctions on us, you allow the problem to grow. You allow the corruption to grow. Even if the sanctions was contributing to your problem, when you use it as a scapegoat, you are denying that there are other causes that you should be addressing. This is a discussion that some of us have had with this panoply of supporters. They've wanted to hang all Zimbabwe's problems on sanctions. Even if you look at the economy was not doing well before the sanctions was imposed, the air brushed that out of sight. It has got to fit their narrative that sanctions are the problem. And so when you hear somebody like Dr. Kosana Moyo coming out and denouncing this so-called Pan-Africanism mentality, it is totally refreshing. Because now we've brushed that aside. We can deal with the problem. We were not the only people who were colonized. Why is it other nations have gone on to move on and accomplish better things? And we are still stuck with blaming the white colonizers. So I believe that argument by Kosana Moyo is important. It's forcing people out of their comfort zone and saying, forget about being colonized. We're not the only one who have been colonized. Others have moved on. And in some cases, even if the new colonizers have moved in, you have got to answer that question yourself. Why is it that you've allowed new colonizers to come in? We have to learn to be masters of our own destiny. And I believe that is one of the key points that Dr. Kosana Moyo was trying to give in that video.
You know, earlier you spoke of the MBC-CCC supporter. And, you know, what I remember is, I think for years leading up to the 2023 elections, we spoke so much on the issue that ZANU-PF is going to rig the election. ZANU-PF has always rigged past election. Zimbabwe is not a democracy. I think we spoke so much on that topic and we were even hated the more. Now, Chamisa had promised them that, don't worry, we've got measures in place. This time, there's no one that is going to rig. And we told him that, this is all nonsense. Now, after what we had said happened, I believe that, a lot of people wanted or expected us to say, no, Chamisa won. They stole from him. That is the position that a lot of people wanted to hear. And they are actually saying that you won the election, they stole it to him. What did you want him to do? That is not the question. The question is, he promised you and he did not deliver. What are you going to do about it? We've got a problem where we want others to do something, and yet we are not doing it ourselves. This is where Dr. Moyo there says, even when you go to the United Nations and you stand up and they give you the podium and they show you that time and space, whatever you're speaking, they don't care about that because you don't have your own affairs in order. You can't go and tell them about democracy. You can't go and tell them about development. You can't go and tell them about human rights when you're failing to feed your own people, when you are, refusing your own people the right to the basics of life. They look at you and like, who are you trying to tell? You are worse off than me. So every time when you see an African leader, a failed state African leader standing up in front, you feel ashamed. And you've got this whole thing written on paper. You wrote this thing yourself. And you are actually doing the opposite back at home. Why did you even go there? Why are we here? We've gotten so accustomed to pushing or finding excuses that we want to blame the next best thing. Anything that is available, you leave a brick on the way to your house and then you trip. You are going to blame that brick to say, why was this brick on the way? But you are the one that left it there. It wouldn't have gotten there if you didn't do that. You're talking of corruption. If Africa was not a corrupt continent, the most corrupt continent, we would have used our resources to build a better future for our children and for ourselves. Look, for example, Zimbabwe. 46 years after independence, Zimbabwe at independence was earmarked for greatness. The next Singapore. Our money was more than, the value of our money was more than the US dollar itself. The mighty US dollar was behind us. So we cannot then go and say sanctions that came way later when we had already devalued this thing and printed zeros and zeros and zeros in front of it. We had already failed. But we do not want to take ownership. And this is what is happening with many states in Africa. Some even have, presidents that are going into their hundreds who can't even walk, talk, and help themselves. And that person there wants to go to the United Nations, wants a seat at the Security Council. You can't protect yourself. Who you going to protect? You cannot protect your own. Who are you? These are the questions that the community of Africa, should be asking and demanding accountability from their leaders, not waiting to look for the next best thing to blame on, or to point a finger at. It really is very, very sad where, we have gotten to a point where we put ourselves in the mud. We have accustomed ourselves to the mud, and it's now normal to be in the mud. It's really, really sad.
I think the other key point that Dr. Moyo pointed out there is that the world is not fooled by our feeble excuses. The world is not fooled by that. They may not follow it up and argue on it, because I think there is a lot of in the saying that a king does not argue with the pigeons. You blame the West for your problems, but everyone can see that you do have a problem, your own making. The issue of corruption, for instance. And you blame outsiders for it. And you seriously expect the outsiders to accept who they are to blame for that? We have discussed on this program the issue of corruption, the gold mafia. Some of us did not know the full detail of how rampant corruption is and how it's working. But listening to that documentary, The Gold Mafia, that was produced by Al Jazeera in 2023, some of us realized the seriousness of the problem. Zimbabwe's gold per annum was $2 billion US, and 80% of it was being smuggled. And when it's smuggled, the reality is the smugglers and their handlers are the only ones who are benefiting from it. That is at the heart of the problem. All Zimbabweans should have understood that bit. And what makes it worse is that the ruling elite are using the proceeds of the looted wealth to corrupt our democratic institutions. We've said on this program that one of the problems we have in Zimbabwe is the failure to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Mnangagwa in 2023 alone must have spent $5 billion US in bribes. Chiefs got as much a new pickup truck, queen cab truck, and some money. Church leaders got cars and money. All the MPs got $40,000 US. Ministers and deputy ministers got 230,000 US dollars. Deputy ministers. Ministers, $500,000 US dollars. All the judges got 400,000 US dollars. Some of these monies were given and to hide the fact that these are bribes, they were given a new name, housing loan. Some of these people have been living in their houses for the last 20 years. Suddenly they need a new house? Of course not. These were just bribes. And they were called loans. Everyone knows that none of them were repaid. So when the people of Zimbabwe, the ordinary people out there, the thinking individuals, realized that corruption was rampant, what did they do? Most of them did nothing. They showed interest in the Al Jazeera gold mafia videos, circulated it for a few weeks at most, and then it was all forgotten. That is at the heart of our problem. We are failing to learn from history, and we keep repeating the same mistakes, and we are paying dearly for it. That is the problem we are facing here.
You know, the part that I did not understand from what Dr. Moyo said there, you know, is the fact that what are we teaching our children on how we run our affairs? You know, our children are seeing what we are doing. Our children are aware of our, you know, of their surroundings. Now more so that it is a digital world. You may be in Mashingo, you will definitely know what happened in Harare in less than 2 minutes. Things are posted and you know, moved so fast. Some of the things are even done live. You don't have to actually be there. You can be a witness to somebody getting beat, dying, killed, whatever it is. You know, I think you gave a statistic, you know, sometime last week, Wilbert, where you said 3% of our graduates actually get jobs. I mean, that alone is motivation enough for whoever is still in school to say to themselves, I need to get out of the country. If I'm going to do my, you know, university diploma, degree, or whatever course, I would rather do it from the outside. You don't need to be told. You can see what is happening. Our continent, particularly Zimbabwe, the level of corruption under Mugabe was child play as compared to what it is under Mnangagwa. You know, you brought off an animation of Mr. Maponga there with his Pan-Africanism story. He suggests that One of the most corrupt gold dealers in Zimbabwe, Scott Sakupwanya, be named Minister of Mines because he's already controlling the majority of the gold industry anyway. Now, this, we know how he is running his business through the black market and so forth. Al Jazeera even went on to giving us the full, details of the operation. And here is somebody that thinks that, is one of the top Pan-Africanists, suggesting that you give the most corrupt guy the entire ministry as to say, this is what will solve our problem and get us moving. Now, how ridiculous is that? Now we are seeing, you're talking of how ZANU-PF using, different individuals are going about handing over large sums of money, expensive vehicles to buy support and their followers. And I'm not surprised when you are talking to say ZANU-PF just in the 2023 elections spent 5 billion. It may look to some, to say, nah, that is impossible. But the amounts of money that were exchanged and given in terms to say loans, feeding the whole nation, whoever went to the rally across the nation, left with a box of chicken and chips, had to be transported there, had to be given t-shirts, and the money adds up. But then you go to the, to any big referral hospital in Zimbabwe, there's no paracetamol there. There's no bandages there. Somebody broke a leg, they had to put 2 pieces of cardboard, hard cardboard, to hold the leg straight. Those that need, cancer machines, that is too much. Our women folk have burdened South African hospitals when they want to give birth. South Africans have been chasing Zimbabweans from their hospitals because our hospitals are incapacitated. Then you can see that all these guys that are getting the loans and what the bottom of the food chain is getting, the crumbs are no longer even dropping to hit the ground. Something would have snatched them from within the air. That is how bad, our Zimbabwe story is. And then when it's time for the United Nations, ZBC will broadcast that our president spoke a very great speech and played for the next 2 weeks. And when you look at the audience, it was empty. Nobody sits down and listens to Zimbabwe speaking. They would rather go and start, take the opportunity to meet each other and sign deals amongst themselves that will better their own countries than to listen to somebody that is failing to look after his own. Somebody that is jailing his own for speaking against corruption. Corruption that he knows and he always speaks about himself. Probably when he's forgotten that he is the most corrupt, according to the Al Jazeera documented. So we are at a point where we are in the mud, but then we have become accustomed to that mud, that it has become our second nature. It has become part of us. Being filthy is is become part of us. Poverty is become part of us. There was a statistic that was shared. I forgot the author that shared it, that said that by 2050, Africa would have doubled because it is the only continent that, can still grow, that is actually still growing. And I look at that number and I'm like, wow, great. Africa is going to be, amongst 30% of the population is going to be, from Africa. That's great. There's going to be more brothers and sisters. But then the question is, we are failing to feed our own few. What are we going to give these that are coming? We are stealing blind from the few that are there. What's going to be left for the, for the new generation that is increasing and is coming up? The crumbs are no longer getting to the floor. What are they going to eat? Where are their, their jobs when they finish their education? When only 3% of this current total population in Zimbabwe actually gets jobs. Where are the rest going to get when we are multiplying? That is very, very serious. You are looking at a hungry Africa at the rate at which we are going. An Africa that is going to be, going to get rampant with crime. That is what we are looking at. It doesn't look bright. Currently, it doesn't look bright at all.
Well, here is one of the Pan-Africanists. And one could say that maybe Dr. Moyo was talking of Atham Tabara. My apologies. I need to line it up.
United Africa, operating with 1.2 billion Africans working together. Collective GDP, $2.3 trillion.
My apologies. Let's try it again.
Operating with 1.2 billion Africans working together. Collective GDP, $2.3 trillion. All our diamonds, our platinum, our gold under one command. One country, one entity, either a federation under one strong government, either a unitary state like China or India. We want to abolish national sovereignty. Not decolonize it, abolish it, so that we have continental sovereignty. Only one sovereignty, African sovereignty, not Malawi sovereignty, Zimbabwe sovereignty. No, just one continental sovereignty. The AU will not be able to unite Africans into one colossus. There are 55 presidents in Africa. Each one of them wants to be a president, a prime minister, even if it means presiding over starving people, even if it means presiding over disempowered people. We cannot expect African leaders, these 55 men, to commit political suicide and legislate themselves out of existence. And guess what? You see, the ever closer African Union allows fragmented states, allows non-viable states. and allows the Chinese, the Indians, and the Americans to come and negotiate with Botswana, negotiate with Nigeria, negotiate with Zimbabwe, we get shortchanged as Africans. Can you imagine if I was to walk up and say, here I come, I'm the African. I speak on behalf of 1.2 billion people. I speak with a GDP of $2.3 trillion behind me. If I did that, I'll be able to get better deals than we get currently under this arrangement. An ever closer African Union will not deliver.
There speaks the Pan-Africanist. For some of you who may not be familiar with him, Arthur Mtambara was the deputy prime minister during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. He was one of the MDC leaders. The number one task that the MDC leaders were given during the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms which would have ended this ZANU-PF dictatorship. They failed to implement even one token reform. Not one. Why? Because ZANU-PF, or specifically Robert Mugabe, bribed them with the trappings of high office, and they forgot about the reforms. And here is an individual who has failed to run the small country, Zimbabwe, and yet he aspires to run the whole of Africa. This is what makes it a joke. He's giving his big speech to Europeans, telling them what Africa could do and what Africa should do. Go and do it. Yet you fail to run Zimbabwe. You fail to get Zimbabwe back on a democratic footing because Mugabe bribed you. And yet, unashamedly, you think you can run the whole of Africa. You want to think big when you can't think small. You can't run your own house, and yet you want to run the village. And having failed to run the village, you want to run the whole country. And when you fail, you find scapegoats instead of facing up to your own, to the reality of your own failures.
Bhazi rikafira musango, munhu asina kwaari kuenda mubhazi mumu anofara kuti ndo patopumba pake nditori nevamwe vangu pana. Munhu anorwadziwa nekurara musango munhu ane kumba.
Taibadana kumba kwangu.
But amana kumba kugombeza rangu reria. Mana so. But munhu asina imba hatete kurara musango. So opposition ino make sure kuti vanhu vaya vawane minda. But may he so rest in peace vatsvangirai. Prazi ravo vanga vainaro. Chamisa anaro.
Anaro chamisa. Ane family.
Kana azoramba. Ndoenda newe.
Riri kupi?
Ane farm.
Ribi.
I know madresse munhu anetsa kuti focha, but anaro. Chakudza off camera.
Okay.
Ane mine. Ane mine. Ane makaseo.
Yeah?
Yes. Biti. Ane prazi. Hauna kumboona here picture ya Biti achitenga mombe kuna Temba Mliswa. Dzekuisa kuprazi. One of the biggest beef producers in the Matabeleland region, the Washman Ngwe.
Okay.
Yes, ane prazi. Anautenga beneficiary pa land reform. But what they did is to discourage their people from acquiring my farms because vaidza kuti munhu akaona something chapiwa nehurumende haachapikisa.
Are you for real, Mr. Kanishai?
Nomubvunza Washman Ngwe kuti haasi kuita beef here, producer beef here paprasi. Tonyaendanetsa upo waching'ono gore rere. Handiti kuti stand ya upo waching'ono standard ine painogumira. But vakatotaura nehurumende nemasabhuku ikaextendwa because aita god.
This is the reality of Africa. Even our intellectuals cannot acknowledge their own failings. They're always finding somebody else to blame. And what makes it worse is that their followers are blind to that reality. Some of them are intellectuals in their own right, professionals in their own right, and yet they continue to be conned by these individuals, and they continue to follow them blindly. That is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. And I'm really pleased when I hear individuals like Dr. Moyo speaking the truth, forcing the people to look ourselves in the mirror and say, no, we are the problem. Let's solve the problem. And stop blaming everybody else for our failings. Because then and only then can we really start getting out of this mess. Ben, do you want to give your closing remarks?
You know, rubber bullets or blanks can be fired from a gun. What Atham Tambarade is saying are those blanks, those rubber bullets. You know, just there to for show, to threaten, to intimidate. You know, Africa has been independent for a very long time. No, we look at Zimbabwe, for example. It has been independent since 1980. That's 46 plus years since its independence, since we found, you know, majority rule, as they want to put it across. That is almost half a century. We're going on half a century. And we still blame everything else on our former colonial master. I bet at this rate, we could get to the century and still blame it on the Smith government, blame it on the West, blame it on you know, Britain, for example. And yet, given the opportunity, we are the first ones to run there and go and try and mend fences, you know, and get help from them. Talk of a united Africa. How do you intend to have a united Africa when you have a president and you allow somebody to stay in power until they're plus 93 years? When you allow, you know, presidents to, you know, violate constitutions, extend their stay beyond, you know, their stipulated times, and you're going to say you're going to get rid of all their jobs and have one African president. I mean, sometimes it's a very, very good dream. It's fine to dream and to daydream, but he also needs to wake up to the reality. Africa has got dictators. Most countries are being ruled by dictators. Most countries are not democratic at all. They hold elections and kill their own people to stay in power. They impoverish their own people to keep them in check. It will starve their own people to keep them in check, to have control over them. That is the Africa that is real, not the one that, you know, Tambara is talking about. That is one that is very vivid in his dream. But that is not reality. Reality is Africa is right at the bottom of the food chain because we have the most corrupt and incompetent and aging leaders in the entire world. We need to address our problem. That is Africa's problem. We need, as Africans, to look at our problem. Then we can start go and talking at the higher stages and engaging those that have got their house in order. You can't go and say to somebody that has got a house that is, you know, that is working. Say, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this, let's fix this. When yours has got no roof, has fallen apart, they will look at you and like, you got to be crazy. Who are you to tell me what to do when you don't have a house at all? You cannot feed your own people. You're killing your own people. What can you tell me about democracy, sovereignty, destroying borders? When you are there, you are 93 years old. You have just amended the constitution without even consulting the people. What can you tell me? That is the question. That is why you find when African leaders are speaking, nobody is even in the audience. Just other African states and those other, you know, countries that want to exploit. That is the reality of Africa. Sad and very, very bleak, even into the future. Thank you.
One of the tragedies of Zimbabwe is ZANU-PF's stubborn refusal to give ordinary Zimbabweans title deeds to even 1 acre of land in the rural areas. This is a policy that was inherited from Ian Smith. Ian Smith did not want to give blacks title deeds to the land because he feared that would be a stepping stone for them. The next thing they'll be asking is political rights. And he didn't want to give them the right to a meaningful vote. ZANU-PF inherited that policy. And right now what we are seeing is if anyone in the rural areas builds a decent home, the regime has been following it up and demolishing it under the pretext that you don't have title deeds to the land. Give them the title deeds. The regime is denying ordinary people title deeds to 1 acre of land, and yet the ruling elite own vast tracts of farms, and they have title deeds, and some of them are selling those farms, although they paid nothing for those farms. What I find so disappointing with this story is that there are many Zimbabweans out there who understand that the right to own property is a fundamental right, just as the right to a meaningful vote is a fundamental right. And yet, they've watched these things going on for the last 46 years and said nothing. I think the rural people themselves, one would be willing to forgive them for doing nothing. Because for somebody like me who grew up in the rural area, understand only too well how the regime operates. Anyone who is considered a challenge to the regime, to the status quo in the rural areas is in serious trouble. If you're an urban dweller, if the headman is becoming a problem, you move to the urban, to your town home, and rarely ever go home. But if you're a rural person, you are stuck. What I find disappointing is the number of so-called the urban dwellers who are aware of this injustice that is taking place, and they've said nothing. Change does not come of its own accord. A good government does not come of its own accord. You have to work for it. Mnangagwa has since passed this new constitutional amendment bill number 3 to extend his stay in office beyond what even was stipulated by the constitution, maximum 10 years. And let's not forget here that the people of Zimbabwe have never elected Mnangagwa in a free, fair, and credible election. Never. He got into State House on the cocktail of the 2017 military coup, went on to rig the 2018 election, and then the 2023 elections. And now he has extended his illegitimate stay by another 2 years by rigging the constitution amendment process. Why are the people of Zimbabwe not standing up and saying enough is enough? I think you should. And this is one effective way you could do that. The people of Zimbabwe do not have to accept this Constitution Amendment Bill number 3. We all know that Mnangagwa is illegitimate. We all know that the process of passing that Constitution Amendment Bill was illegal. There was no democratic process in that. The rational thing to do is to ignore it then. The people of Zimbabwe should prepare themselves for elections in 2028. Mnangagwa thinks he's got the right now to stay in power until 2030. He can think what he likes. The Constitution of Zimbabwe says there should be election in 2028. That has not changed. And the people should stand firm on that position. If there is no election in 2028, I believe the people of Zimbabwe have every right to demand an explanation why that is so. Enough is enough. That is the number one message I would like to leave with the people of Zimbabwe today. Good night.